I was obsessed with the question and still am. I will never quench my thirst for Russian history. I love that period of 1890 to 1925. It's just it's so fucking crazy. Like the autocracy embodied in Tsar Alexander. And then you get this like weird fail son, Nicholas, who is kind of a good guy, but also terrible. And also Russian autocracy itself is terrible. And then I just became obsessed with the question of like, why did the Bolshevik Revolution succeed? Because like people in Russia didn't necessarily want Bolshevism. People suffered a lot under Bolshevism and it led to Stalinism. How did Vladimir Lenin do it? Right? Like, and I became obsessed with that question. And it's still, I find it so interesting, which is that series of accidents of history, incredible boldness by Lenin, incredible realpolitik, smart, unpopular decisions made by Trotsky and Stalin, and just like the arrogance of the czars and of the Russian like autocracy. And just, but at the same time, there's all these like cultural implications of this, right? In terms of like how it became hollowed out post Catherine the Great and all that. I was obsessed with autocracy because Russia was an actual autocracy and like actually, and I'm like, it was there. Like they didn't even remove serfdom to like the Civil War in America. Like that's crazy. Like, you know, and nobody really talks about it. And I just became, I was like, was Bolshevism a natural reaction to the excesses of Tsarism? There is a convenient explanation where that is true. But there were also a series of decisions made by Lenin and Stalin to kill many of the people in the center left and marginalize them, and also not to associate with the more quote unquote like amenable communists in order to make sure that their pure strain of Bolshevism was the only thing. And the reason I like that is because it comes back to a point I made earlier. It's all about intentionality, which is that you actually can will something into existence, even if people don't want it. That was the craziest thing. Like nobody wanted this, but it still ruled for half a century, well, more actually. I mean, almost, you know,
that's
75 years.
To think that there could have been a history of the Soviet Union that was dramatically different than Leninism, Stalinism. That was completely different. Like almost would be the American story.
Yeah, easily. I mean, there's a world where, and I don't have all the characters. There's like Kerensky, and then there was like whoever Lenin's number two, Stalin's chief rival, and even, I mean, look, even a Soviet Union led by Trotsky, that's a whole other world, right? Like literally a whole other world. And yeah, it's just, I don't know. I find it so interesting. I will never not be fascinated by Russia. I always will. It's funny that I get to talk to you because it's like I read this book. I forget what it's called. I think it won a Pulitzer Prize, and it was like the story of. I tried to understand Russia post Crimea because I came up amongst people who are much more like neoconservative, and they're like, "Fuck Russia, you know, Russia, bad, bye." And I was like, "Okay, like what do these people think?" And we have this narrative of like the fall of the Soviet Union. And then I read this book from the perspective of Russians who lived through the fall. And they were like, I was like, this is terrible. Like, actually, the introduction of capitalism was awful. And all, like the rise of all these crazy oligarchs. That's why Putin came to power to like restore order to the oligarchy.
And he still talks to this day. Do you guys, I mean, that's always the threat of like, do you want to return to the 90s?
Right.
Do you want to return
to Yeltsin? And like, but the thing is in the West, we have this like our own propaganda of like, no, Yeltsin was great. That was the golden age. What could have been with Russia? And I was like, well, what do actual Russians think? And so that, I'll always be fascinated by it. And then just like to understand the idea of feeling encircled by NATO and all of that, you have to understand like Russian defense theory all the way going back to the Tsars has always been defense in depth in terms of having Estonia, Lithuania, and more as like protection of the heartland. I'm not justifying in this, so NATO shills, like, please don't come after me. But, and look, Estonians like NATO. They want to be in NATO, so I don't want to minimize that. I'm more just saying like, I understand him and Russia much better, having done that, and we're very incapable in America. I think this is probably because my parents are immigrants and I've traveled a lot, of like putting yourself in the mind of people who aren't Western and haven't lived a history, especially our lives, of America's fucking awesome. We're the number one country in the world. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, we're literally better than you, like in many ways. And they can't empathize with people who have suffered so much.
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting to me.